All right, so with line quality, we're talking about how to use your lines to indicate certain things. So we have that thickness of line where you have a thin line, you have a solid line, and then you have your like thicker grounded lines, and the variation of that communicating different things and where to communicate that. So these line variations indicate a whole bunch of stuff, but basically what it boils down to is you're going to want a relatively light line to be your sketch lines, to kind of have you figuring out your object, building your perspective grids, doing something that will indicate what your object is and all that jazz. So that is your sketch line, and this should be the lightest, or in lieu of that, or if you don't have a pen that draws lighter, you could draw with a different color or something like that. So that's your sketch line. Then you have your I forget the name of all the lines, but essentially you would have an outline, which is a relatively solid line. It doesn't need to be overly thick or overly thin. It's just something that tells you what all your shapes are, and kind of identifies what's really your object rather than what's construction lines. So that ignores all your construction lines. So from there, then we have our thicker line, which will be kind of an indicator of what the light source is doing. So if we have a light source doing that, darling, I might just put the computer on charge so that it stops doing that. Does it go dark up there or only on my screen? Oh, well. I'll do this anyway for my sanity. All right. So now we have a heavier line indicating kind of our three-dimensionality. So if we draw everything flat like that, it's all going to look flat. But if you pick the far side from the light source and just beef up those lines a little bit, then you have an indicator of kind of three-dimensionality, if that makes sense. Another place to add a little bit of strength of your line is on curves. So if you have a curve, you might want to add a little bit of depth to that line, a little darker on that line, maybe a little darker on that line if you want, just to create a little bit more visual interest. Same with any kind of change of direction. So any change of direction, if you throw a little thicker line there, it kind of draws attention to that and reinforces the fact that that's where your object ends. So that's why when we're constructing stuff, you can do lines that go like that, like come off of your object like this. You overdraw stuff, because afterwards we come in with a thicker line and we just indicate where that ends, and then visually you ignore these things, but they help reinforce the structure of that object. So then you have your thickest line, which is kind of to ground your object. So it would be something to just cast that shadow. I usually like doing it on one side. I might do it up the back here, but some of the other teachers, they like doing it on both of the ground planes to indicate that your thing's sitting on a ground plane. Whatever you do, just remember you got a light source. So I should have drawn this in perspective. So you have a light source, and your light source is indicating, where those dark lines should be. Yeah? So that's that. You also have broken lines. Broken lines are good for indicating, let's do a curve the other way. Broken lines are good at indicating, again, curves. So if you're not going to go a little darker, you might want to go a little lighter and do kind of like a broken line like that. That will indicate light. So where it breaks here, that indicates that the light is hitting this spot, and it's kind of shorthand for something like this. So if you ever do a broken line on an object, whether it's a cube or what, so something like that, then what that says is that side is in the light. So your light source is coming this way and it's hitting that side. So it's the opposite of this double thick line that we're throwing down there. Yeah? Is that all understandable? So that's week 1, done. Week 2. What was week 2? Oh, isometric projection. So that was where we did our front side and top views. I think we established that pretty good because we went through it over and over. But just for the sake of a quick recap, oops. Alright, we'll do it like that. Fine. So if this was our front, top, front, and side views, then that isometric breakdown was us not worrying about perspective, but doing all our diagonal lines parallel. So this is parallel to this. I don't like drawing like this because it's difficult once you learn perspective to draw in isometrics, and B, this is for like engineering drawing, not for perspective drawing, and I don't want you to get in the habit of drawing this line and this line and this line all parallel. I want you to get in the habit of drawing them in perspective. But for the sake of this, we've got our top view has some information, our side view has some information, and then when you combine all that information, then you get whatever your object actually is. In this case, it's just a wedge like that. And then you can use a line weight to reinforce the shape of this object like that. Yep, so that was week 2. Check. All right, I won't go every week, but we'll just kind of recap. So the next few weeks were perspective focused, and the most important part of this perspective focused weeks was finding that horizon line, finding that vanishing point, and in week 1 it was doing our 1-point perspective where everything went back to that 1 point like that. Oops. So that was week 1. Week 2 was where we rotated this object and we started working within 2-point perspective, where some of the vanishing point, some of the stuff moving away from us is going to that side, some of it's going to this side, but wherever it's going, it's hitting that horizon line, landing on that vanishing point, and then giving us that that 2-point perspective, like that. Yeah? So that was all we did there. Remember, really important, remember always draw through your perspective so you have all sides of this object. So 1, 2, 3, 4 of the walls, the roof, and the bottom, just so that when you're constructing something, you can make sure that you can use each side to figure out, how this thing fits together. If it's just some kind of blobby object that curves into 2 circles, then at least you have all the information you need to create that thing. So that's all the perspective stuff. Now, ellipses and divisions. Now, most important divisions was the thirds, the fifths, and the quarters. Those are the ones you're going to do the most. And to get to all of those is your fundamental find the center of your object, find that center, and then we got split it in half either way. And from there, if it's quarters, you can just do it again like that, and we find another half of the half, which is a quarter, and a half of a half that way, quarter. We can do it again down there, and we find that half of the half, and that half of the half, and then we found quarters. Now, doing the same thing, we start with that X, and we want to find thirds. We found that center point. We found that center point. So now we can go. I brought all these fancy colors. I'm not even using them. Do you guys like this rattling off one machine gun the semester? You guys doing all right? All right. So now that we got that, if we go like that, boom, that gives us this intersection between the X and that diagonal, which is a third. If we do it on the other side, not only do we get a second point to help us find that third, but we also found both of the vertical thirds. So if we did it from the other side, down this way, it should hit there and gives us this third as well. So that's how you find thirds. And then if you need thirds of thirds, etc., you just do it again. So now you can accurately depict specific measurements in perspective. Because once you know that, you just put it on this wall, boom, X, get that center, go like that, find that third, and now we can make a Rubik's Cube, even though this was oblong. So we've got a 9x9 cube on that side because we found thirds. Fifths was the hard one, at least for me, where you find that center point, find those middle points, and then with fifths, you draw from the middle point, skipping 2 spots and going to the opposite corner. So, do I have a better highlighter? I'll just use this purple. So, we go this middle point, skip 1, 2 points, go to the third point, draw like that. We find this middle, start from there, skip 1, 2, draw to this corner. And then the center, skip 1, 2, draw to the next corner. And then this center, skip 1, 2, draw to this corner. And then we found all these little floaty points everywhere, which then when we draw them, give us fifths. There it is. So we found this point, this point, this point, and this point, and we can draw them straight up and down, like that, through each one of those points. Pretend my lines are better, or we can draw them this way, horizontal, but whichever way we draw them, we found fifths. If you spend a little more time doing it accurate, these would all be the same size. But that's just doing the math of figuring it out. Next, we did shade and shadow and tone. Now, this is another area that I saw on a lot of the assignments people were struggling with. And I think it's because I was a little too vague with you guys, maybe. The problem is with me, not with you guys. I see how hard you're working. But let's just go through it again. So I got you guys to do this gradient where you drew from dark to light, trying to keep it consistent and smooth. So we just, however you're shading, just keeping it a consistent kind of gradual going from dark to light. And then over here you have black, absolute black, and over here you have absolute white. So now we have a gradient from dark to light, and we have absolute white and absolute dark. Now when we have an object and we need to shade it, we need to figure out what our lightest point is, so that would be this rooftop, and then choose one of the sides to be our darkest point. And what we don't want to do is go all the way to the dark. You want to go somewhere about halfway to the dark, or just wherever you feel comfortable, but make sure that it's not just black. We don't want to fill that in black. So I might choose this area here. So I look at that tone, then I come here and I try to capture that tone on what I would consider the dark side. So I try to match that side up with whatever that tone is, asking myself, is that about right? And then kind of touching it until it feels about right. And then we look at the darkest thing that we just did and the lightest thing we just did, and halfway between those, that's going to be our mid-tone. So we're going to do that tone on the mid-tone side. Yeah? And then the other area that's important is in our cast shadow. So I still have a lot of people kind of drawing their cast shadow as black. Shadows, we don't want our shadow to be the darkest thing on the page. If your shadow is your darkest thing on the page, what that's going to do is it's just going to distract from your object. So we want this to match your mid-tone, because it's going to be cast out from your shadow side. So we want it to link up with your mid-tone. So those two should be the same. So again, here, if this is our dark side, I choose one of those gradients to say this is how dark it is. And then if I've chosen, then I know on this side is going to be my mid-tone. So I can go like that. Now this is a curved surface, which means as it goes up from here and curves to the lightest side, we're going to get a little bit of a gradient. So that just means we're going to have a slightly lighter version of that, and then a lighter version of that. And then that creates a curve. Yeah? So you can do it in chunks like that, or you can do it gradually in one fluid motion. But essentially we want these strips of different tones moving from whatever is under it to whatever is above it. And that goes for any shape. So if we have a cylinder, let's go with this way. No, let's go, sorry. I'll just do that, boom. And then we get a cylinder like this, and we say that this is going to be where the light's hitting the hardest. And then here we're going to get a slight tapering of the light. And then we're going to get our core shadow side. And then we're going to get a tapering of the light again, but this one's going to be a little darker than the one above it. And then we're going to get this matching this and this matching. And likewise, the shadow should just about match that as well. Actually, the shadow is going to match this one. Anyway, it's confusing when it's a cylinder. But then we got that. We've got that kind of shadowing of that. Yeah? So just think of it in steps when you're shading stuff. What step is this? If this is my darkest side, then that's a step. And if you make it like almost black like that, then that means your mid-tone. If it's all the way over there, our mid-tone isn't going to be like here. Our mid-tone's probably going to be more like over there. So then we've got to make sure that our mid-tone matches our shadow by being about halfway between that and what our lightest light is. And then we'll get a nice transition. Okay, what's next? Oh, the ellipses. We didn't do the ellipses here, but going back to this measuring sides, we're doing the whole term in one sitting. How's everybody going with this? So far, so good? All right. So then, with an ellipse, we find that x like we always do. We find those middle points. And we know that each one of these middle points, if we put a circle in here, the circle is going to hit each one of those middle points. But then the circle is also going to hit, if I drew that properly, 2/3 up each of the diagonal lines. So if we split those into thirds, I know that I can draw from here to here in an arc. I can draw from there to there in an arc. This is not quite a square, so it's not going to look like a perfect circle. I can draw from here to here in an arc, and likewise 1/3, 2/3, like that, and then we get that circle that fits in that area. And then if we do that on a diagonal or on a plane that's in perspective, like that, it doesn't matter what the perspective is. We just need to find those center points, like that. And then we find those thirds. Find those thirds. Oh, that one should be probably there. Find those thirds, etc. And then once we have that, we can kind of come here, draw like that, and then get that ellipse that goes in that. Yeah? Ta-da! All right. This is the speed round. I'm working up a sweat. I'm not actually, but I can pretend that I'm a sporty person. Now, materials, colors, textures. We're going off of a lot of this to do our textures. So I don't know who remembers or who was here for the textures, but if we make the same gradient with random strokes, so going from dark to light, if we do random strokes and then have those strokes get lighter and lighter and lighter, then what we've just done is we've established a texture. The same can be done with markers. So that right there is a gradient for, actually we'll make it even darker here because we're trying to get to black. And then over here we would have black. So same with color or tone. We would have going light and more saturated to, dark and more saturated to light and less saturated. Saturated means how much of the color is in there. So this is a very saturated color. This is not as saturated. So if we did a gradient with these two, this would be somewhere over here. And then this would be on the lighter end of that spectrum, like that. So that's a scale of light to saturated. Unsaturated to saturated, but also light to dark. Because then if you come in here and you add your steps of gray, we have 5 going there. Then we go to 3, 3, and then and then 1. Then we have a gradient for that color that has more saturation towards the darker end of it and the mid-tones, and less saturation towards the lighter tones. But that's how we do it here. So if we were to shade this guy with color, we want our more saturated colors here and those shades, and then we would come over here and throw our less saturated colors there. And then we have a pink thing. Shows up less good on this than it does on my paper, so maybe I'll use a little bit more saturation because this camera is not picking it up very well. There we go. Anyway, all right. So with textures, it's the same deal. We're just trying to find some rhythm to create that gradient. Doesn't matter what that rhythm is, as long as you're going from pretty much black to lighter and lighter until you get to a white. And then you've got yourself a texture. Whatever that texture is, you have to decide for yourself. But you just have to make it from light to dark. So you can play around with those textures by drawing from observation. Also, in terms of textures and materials, if you have an object like a cylinder that's supposed to be metal, or any shape, let's say a cube, if you have these objects and they're supposed to be shiny, or at least satin or whatever, what you're going to do is you're going to compress the change from light to dark, and if it's matte, you're going to pull out that light to dark. So in other words, if we just use markers for this, I have 5, 3, and 1. And then I don't think I have a set. Oh, maybe I do have a 7. No, that's a 5. Damn. All right. Anyway, I have 5, 3, and 1 here. Let's say this is very shiny. Then what we're going to want to do is we're going to establish the darkest spot. And then we're going to quickly transition from that to our mid-tone. So we don't want to drag that out too much. And from our mid-tone to our lighter tone, we're keeping that transition really fast. So the faster we keep that transition and the more extreme between them, so if we even added black there, it makes it look very shiny. Because we have a very quick transition from our darkest point to our lightest point. However, if we wanted the opposite of that, if we wanted it to slowly transition from dark to light, let's do that with this sphere. If we want a slower transition from dark to light, what we do is we find our darkest color, put that aside, go to our mid-tone, find that core shadow with our mid-tone, kind of slowly work up to our lighter tone, our highlight tone, and then just fill in the rest of the area, and then we get our lighter tone, and we take over from our lighter tone to that highlight area. So we find out where the highlight is, and we just kind of slowly work out from there until we hit that core shadow area. And then from that core shadow, you're going to come with your darkest color. Usually your darkest color is a little bit lighter than it normally would be if it's a matte. So I probably shouldn't jump to 5 here, but I'm doing it. And it doesn't help that my 3 is almost dead. Is this another 3? Oh, this is another 3. Here we go. So now I can keep coming back and forth until I have that transition looking really slow. So the slower that transition looks, the more matted this color will look. If that makes sense. Yeah? So that doesn't look super shiny. That does look super shiny. Yeah? And the slow, like I said, the slower that transition and the less of a jump between the lightest spot and the darkest spot, the more matte it's going to look. So if the whole thing was just filled in with the 3 gray, then it's going to look even more matte. If we barely have a transition, the more of that we do, the flatter it looks. I mean, not the flatter it looks, the matter it looks. The flatter it is, the matter it looks. Got it. Okay, next is reflective. So if something is reflective, then we kind of throw out what we're doing in terms of, God, I shouldn't have done the reflective as a cube, but whatever. We throw out what we're doing with the shade and shadow, and we add reflection. So we start thinking about what's in our peripheral. So if there's something here, then it's going to reflect onto this side here, like that. Yeah, so that's what reflection is. So when you're shading the reflective side, there's a shortcut, which is doing like an earthy, orangey brown and a blue for the skies, right? So you have, if this is chrome, that top is going to be reflecting sky, and that bottom is going to be reflecting dirt or ground. And then you do that, and you combine it with a little bit of shading, a little bit of shade and shadow. So we know that that's going to be the ground. The horizon might be a little darker, and then it might work up to lighter towards us. Something like that. And then similarly, it might be dark up here, and then work lighter towards the horizon line. And then we've got a reflective side there. You can do it without the colors. You can just do it with grays, like that. Something like that. Boom. But that's reflective. So reflective, you don't really draw much. You might just, if you wanted to make something look reflective, you might just throw a couple lines there. So if this was a reflective this, we might just throw a couple lines like that, and then maybe something like that. There we go. Shorthand for reflection. Cheerio. My pleasure. I've been adequate. Hopefully. If you guys all pass, then I'll accept that. Thank you. Where are we? Canvas. All right, texture material, explode views. All right, this is another area that might need a little update.
Maybe do a check.
How's everybody going with this? Have I lost anybody?
Where keep going? There are questions.
Okay. Does anyone have questions so far about any of this? Any of these weeks? Anything that you want clarified or anything like that?
If the material is transparent or translucent, how do you do that?
That's a good question. Thank you for asking. So, transparent is a shorthand for rendering something that's transparent. Let's do it here. Let's say we got a transparent cube like this, or not transparent, let's say translucent, right? Because transparent, all you do is, if it's completely see-through, you just draw whatever object is inside it, right? Or behind it. But let's say we have this guy, and inside it we have a pyramid, or not a pyramid, what's the other one? Cone. All right, so we got a cone inside a cube, and we're trying to make it transparent. So transparent, you don't have much in the way of light and shadow, so you might have like one of the sides catching some kind of light like that, or some kind of shadow. But the more in light it is, remember, the more of its own color it doesn't show through. So we might have something like that. And then whatever your object in the middle is, you shade that. But you wouldn't have as much contrast on this inner object as you do on your outer object, because it's being muted by what's around it. So I might come here, get the one, kind of do something like that. So then we got this. And then if I come here with a 3, then I would also probably want to come here with a 3. What you can do is, never mind. Don't worry about what you can do. Why is this so dry? Where's my other 3? I grabbed another 3 that worked. This one. So this would be somewhat of a transparent thing, but then you would also have, so you would do essentially each side by itself, if that makes sense. So this back wall here, I would shade that, and then we've got a transparent kind of thing. You think of it as not there. If it's translucent, what we do is a similar thing where we have our object, oops, a very sloppy cube, and we shade it with our 1, 2, 3 or whatever. I'm going to go 3 here. I'm going to go 1 on the other side. Yeah, so 1, 2, 3 there. But I'm also going to think of this back wall. So that back wall is also going to have this 1, because it's going to be similar to this one. So I might have, I won't go completely to the side, but it will be reflecting a little bit of that through to this side, so it'll be a little darker there. And now we're starting to get a little bit of a translucent kind of thing. Yeah, and then if there's an object inside it, you might have that shadow kind of ignoring those areas. So I might add a little bit of darkness outside of that area, something like that. And now we're starting to get the shape of what's in there by suggesting what's not there, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. Yeah? So translucent, transparent. Transparent, you just see straight through. Translucent will have, you won't actually see the object. But then, if it's colored, we'd have something like that. That's a dead marker, so maybe it's not colored. Forget about it. If it's colored, we'll have more of that color in the midtones and the shades. Yeah. Okay. What's next? Next is, exploded views. So this is the part, hopefully, you guys are doing all right with. I won't know until I look at the next assignment. I'll try this.
Oh, that's right.
What are you looking for? Darker and lighter?
This is the never mind. Just,
Darker.
yeah, and it she shows up better.
Now? Is it better now? Okay, exploded view. We've got an object, something like a water bottle. Boom. You draw your object. The reason why we want you to draw, and I said it a million times, but maybe not everybody heard it. The reason why we want you to draw through your object is so that you make sure that you can fit all the objects that you want in your water bottle, on your water bottle, or whatever your product is. So if I come here and I do like some kind of latch system here, and it picks up this lid, but inside the lid is going to be like this thick around. Bless you, my love. That's my wife, for anyone listening and not actually physically here. Just clarifying for that I'm not calling my students. Anyway, All right. So this lid, I have a thickness. I've established where it's going to go, and then we got this little thing. Now, let's say I want to put a little drinking hole here. That drinking hole is going to go down. Maybe there's going to be a component here that sits on the bottom of it like that, and then comes down like this. And then at the bottom of that component is going to be a straw, the straw that goes all the way up. And then that straw goes all the way down to the bottom of the bottle. So that's our components for this water bottle. Now that we have them all, almost all, because I didn't draw this hinge. Let's say that hinge is 2 parts like that, and it comes around like that. Okay, now that I have all those components, now we can start figuring out the exploded view by hierarchy. And this is where I would suggest color coding or whatever, doing whatever you got to do. So in this case, I'm going to say yellow is my straw. Boom. I know that the straw is there. I'm going to say green is the cap. So I know that all of this is the cap. So I have that component, and then maybe we have pink is this little component thing here that turns into this, that holds the straw. So I know where that is. And then let's say blue is this hinge. So I got that hinge. And then that's good enough. And then white will be that main bottle. So now that I have all the components, I know the hierarchy to pull them out. I can pull the bottle out like that. The bottle is going to be like that with a little inner lip thing here that kind of goes like that. So I know that that's what I'm trying to seek for the bottle. And then it's going to have a little groove here for the hinge thing to go into. Something like that. And other than that, it's just going to be a solid thing. Okay, and then this is going to have a little hole in it. So that's my bottle body. Bottle. Okay, coming to think of it, that hinge needs to be opening up the top of the bottle. I forgot about that. So let's say the top of the bottle is orange, so all of this area is orange. So now I have this component here, all orange. That's that bit. Now I can pull out here. We know that our hinge is going to look something like that and something like that being pulled out of the side there. And then green lid is going to be at the top. So I'll pull it up all the way to there. But how do we do this in perspective? This is me just figuring out where everything goes, making sure that it's all going to fit as information on my exploded view. So making sure that I have all the bits exploded so that I can do it in one explosion, and then we'll have the straw kind of coming out there. So now I have all those bits. Now we've got to draw that in perspective. So we have a reference for it. So then I'm going to come here. I'm going to find my 3060. So remember 3060, we've got vanishing point. We've got measuring point. We've got object in the middle. We've got measuring point in the other middle. And then we've got vanishing point somewhere that way. And so with all that information, we can come here, get a slightly lighter pen, draw that to whatever my vanishing point that way is, and then draw this to this vanishing point. Oops. Goddamn. All right. So we've got that. Now we drop that distance. Why do we have the vanishing points? Because we drop this distance down. So measure out that distance this way, like that. draw that to the measuring point, find that bottom corner, we've got that side of the cube. Draw that back in perspective, do the same thing this way, find that point, draw that to the other measuring point, find this side of the cube. Now we've got a cube, and we can find more by finding more of those measuring points, or just do our little X, draw through the middle, and then where it hits the next one, we'll get more and more of these cubes. So that's great. So now that we've got all these cubes, we're gonna explode our object. So I might explode it so that the body of the bottle is coming towards us, so that we see more of the components coming out. So let's say the body of the bottle is 2 cubes, 2 cubes tall. So this would be 2 cubes, boom. I know that I'm gonna have 2 cubes, and then I want a little bit of a gap, so I'm gonna bring a cube this way. So the same way we did the other way, we can extend this perspective, draw through the middle, find that next cube. I was right in my guess. And then draw that back in perspective there. Draw that, draw that, draw that. All right. So now, this is the bottom of the bottle. So the bottom of the bottle is not the full cube.
You good?
Yeah, I'm just re-going through each of the weeks.
Excellent. See you later.
See ya. Okay, so we're going to come in a little bit on each side. So we go boom. I'm coming in on each side a little bit, and then I'm going to do my ellipse there. So that creates the bottom here. Now, 2 things later, it's going to be the full cube. So 1, 2. I'm going to come here like that and go like that. Ugh. It's sloppy, but it's good enough. And it's got like a little bit of a curve. I'm going to do a little bit of a curve, a little bit of a curve. And now I've got the shell kind of worked out. Yeah? And then from the shell, we're going to pull out the straw. I'm going to ignore the straw for now, but I'm going to leave enough of a gap for it. So we'll say that the straw is going to end, if I pull it up, it's going to end maybe here. And I just want to make sure that all the gaps are relatively the same. So then there's this component, is the next component. That component is roughly about a half of a cube tall. So I'm going to start it maybe here. And I'm going to find half of a cube. So I'm going to eyeball it. I'm going to say that's half a cube. So now I know that that plane right there is where I'm going to draw this component. So this component is split into 2 halves. So I'm going to go like that. Have my half. Half my half. Okay, now I'm going to decide where it's going to go. It's going to go here. So what we can do is we can draw from there in perspective, and that tells us where it would be on this object. So now that I've got that, I can kind of go here, and I can say, okay, that to that is going to be 1/2 of it, and it curves at the bottom, so it's going to be something like that. And then we're going to get a little hole for the straw, and then the top half is going to go like that, and it's going to hit this about there. So then we've got that component. Now I can come in here, draw the straw so that it'll fit in there, and you can project it in space if you need to. So then that straw goes into the thing. Next we have the lid, the actual cap lid, this part, which is the full size. So we did about 1/4 of a gap, so we'll do another 1/4 of a gap. So if this is where it was, I'm going to do about there. And then we do our ellipse there, because it's the full deal. And then Oh wait, the top of this needs to come in a little bit. So we'll bring that in a little bit, just so that lip can sit on top of that. Okay, so we got that. It comes out. I'm gonna start eyeballing from here, so I don't slow down the class by measuring out everything. But we find that, and then it's got this little part on top, which is about that size. So then we got that as the bottom, and then that as the top. And now we've got that component. And then there's a little hole where it would be. Next we have the green part, just the lid proper. So the lid proper needs to be able to fit on top of this. So we can draw that out in perspective, draw that out in perspective. But it's a full cube, so we already know that. And then the top of this is here. So then we're gonna go half, or a quarter rather. Find that, we found that. We draw our ellipse, whoa. And then we go, what is that, like a quarter? We go a quarter up. Yeah, it's about there. And then we come here, and then we bring it in, bring it in, bring it in, bring it in, draw an ellipse there, and then we have that lid, like that. And then from here, we would have the bottom groove here, or however the hinge is going in, groove there, and you would project this way your hinge. So you would come here using the perspective, project it out this way, have a little bit of this action, and then a little bit of this action. Now I'm shorthanding a lot of stuff, but hopefully you guys are kind of understanding loosely what I'm doing. Do you guys understand loosely what I'm doing? Okay, good. And now we have maybe an arrow going this way. So remembering that our arrows are in three-dimensional space, so they should indicate a three-dimensional. After saying that, I messed that up, but they should have some three-dimensionality. So that, and then maybe something like this. Using the perspective we've established, doing a thicker side, perspective we've established, perspective we've established. There we go. Something like that. Okay. So that's that. Any questions on that? Exploded view? All right, so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about exploded views. So that's why we do this skeleton of it. Firstly, to make sure that everything fits in it, but also to give us a hierarchy so that when we explode it, we can plan out where each part is going to go so that it all looks equidistant. We're almost there, right? Oh, and then storyboarding. Tell stories. Danla. No. Okay. Storyboarding, what we're trying to focus on is simplifying communication, getting straight to the point. So if we're pulling off a lid from a pin, we've got our pin here. If I know that a hand is going to be in the scene, I only want the pin to hit 1/2 of the frame, because we're going to have 2 objects in this frame. So I want the pin to be in that corner so that the other object can be in this corner. Other object, in this case, being a hand, like that, and then thumb like that. Something like that. So then we got this, step 1, and then step 2 would be perhaps something like that and something like this. Suggesting the hand. But this is enough information to explain that action, because the only key moments are that the lid's on and the lid's off. We can pretty much assume people can figure out what happens in between there. However, if this lid is a tricky lid and doesn't just pull off, if it screws off, then we would need another frame here like this, indicating that it's screwing off, making sure to draw our arrow in the perspective of our pin, something like that. Oops, that should be around the body of the lid, something like that. So that would be our lid saying unscrew it. And then we have a 1, 2, 3. But again, that's minimal information. That's the least amount of information we can possibly do to explain the thing. Sometimes the storyboard's going to be one frame of you just doing the action. So for our water bottle that I just drew, I might have a frame like this. How did it look? Something like that. So this might be my storyboard for this water bottle. Is something like that, and then something like that. And let's say the straw comes up when you open the lid. So this will have a little bit of a up arrow here, and then the lid will have a bigger curved arrow like that. Remembering to work in whatever perspective you got. I've got kind of this weird perspective, unfortunately. So it would be, oh God, it's a bit of a hard arrow. Something like that. Yeah, so open it, straw comes out. I did that in one frame. We don't need more information than that. So that's storyboarding. Yeah? And remembering the main part of storyboarding is about your framing. You can do the framing after you draw it. So I just drew that. And now I can be like, okay, I want the framing to be like that. I want my object to be dead center or whatever, if that's the case. So you don't have to do it in reverse order. But when you do it in reverse order, you have to remember that in my frame, there's certain hot spots that are best for information balancing. You want to balance everything within your frame and have a clear border where there's no action drawing from your work. All right, any other questions before we call it a wrap? How's everybody going? Did any of you guys have to resubmit an arc intersect cube? No? Y'all did well? Did you look on Canvas? See here.